Sometimes the conversations that matter most inside of an organization happen off the record. But today, the questions that you actually sent us are going on the record. Let's see if our answers hold up.
Hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and today I am joined by my co-host. His name is Scott Morris. He's a former CHRO with all the playbooks and scar tissue to prove it. But today we have a third person in the room, and she is the reason this format works. Rhiana Barr is a friend of mine. She's a two-time chief people officer and now works at Pinnacle Peak HR as a fractional CHRO and an executive coach. She happens to have worked with me back at Nestle in Clearwater. So all of this that you're going to see today or listen to, I've had a front row seat for this for years. And she's here because this episode's different. You have, over the last several months, sent in the questions through the number in the show notes or sometimes just tracking us down in real life. Either way, the right person to ask them is someone who's actually lived them. So, Rhiana, welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast.
Well, thank you, Jackson. I'm so happy to be here. I have been a long time listener of this show, and I know you guys don't do easy answers, and that is why I said yes.
I love that you're here. I've had a great time meeting you. I'm glad you're doing this with us. And I think to the audience, I think Rhiana is actually going to hold us to it. And let me tell you why I think that matters. She has an operating history. She's been a CHRO. She knows when an answer is incomplete and when it is operationally complete. She's been in those rooms. And, that's the differentiator between what a real answer is and what a polished answer sounds like. And you know what? Before we get into it, Rhiana, we do a shout out every week to people that have written in or have asked us questions. And this week's shout out that I want to do isn't just for one person. It's for everybody. And I'm really excited about this, Jackson. I know you're really excited about it too. We've been named a top 100 management podcast in May for several different countries. Now, the U.S., obviously, but that list also includes, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to read it because there are so many of them, Cyprus, France, the U.S., Taiwan, Sweden, Germany, Canada, Australia, Austria, and we were, if I've got this right, Jackson, we were top 200 in Malaysia, Ghana, Singapore, and Hong Kong. And I think that's interesting because when Jackson and I started doing this, we had no idea if anybody was going to listen. And so a genuine heartfelt thank you and a shout out to everyone who is listening around the world. You are proving that the conversation about how human capital actually works matters, not just across industries, but across every market and obviously around the world in a bunch of different countries.
And Scott, you forgot Norway, where we're the number one management podcast, top 20 in business and top 40 overall, which is like absolutely mind blowing. So yeah, we are unbelievably grateful. And that list of countries is proof that what we're doing here matters and that you are really serious about the work. And I can also tell that based on the questions that you sent in. I think you are here for a real conversation.
I would agree with that. And that includes every person who sent in a question. I've read through all of them. You asked the right things, so let's get into it. We're going to have a great time.
Oh my God.
Before we get into the listener questions, there are two things that I wanted to ask that I think everyone listening could be curious about. So Jackson, what were you doing before this? And what was the moment that told you that this was the work that you were supposed to be doing?
The honest answer is that I spent most of my career inside organizations watching the same problem show up in different configurations. And what I mean by that is this whole mandate clarity is so unbelievably important. And yet the numbers would suggest that we have serious issues with management, CEOs, boards, and HR aligning on what this function is supposed to do. And I think you look back a few months, we had Scott Bontempo on the podcast. And one of the things he talked about is the difference between what CEOs expect very dramatically from one CEO CHRO relationship to the next. And I was trying to figure out why that was. And I think that comes down to two things. The first is a low altitude mandate. It's a very functional mandate and one that feels right in the moment. And the second is an identity vacuum where most first-time CHROs, and sometimes if you've been through it, maybe even into your second run, you don't realize that a CHRO job is not the more senior version of every job you've had up to that point. It's uniquely different. So I wanted to really start focusing in on that mandate and helping people figure out what that is, because I think it's the ultimate road to helping us figure out how human capital should really work, which is why we talk about that every time on the pod. So the decision to build Talent Sherpa, I think, was just a decision for me to change that conversation at scale.
Justin, if I can add one thing, just by observation for the year and something that you and I have been doing this together, the learning that you have had in the context that you've been in is really expensive learning. And you only get that like when you're inside the room and something goes wrong. And what I appreciate about what you bring, and certainly what you have taught me a lot of, are those expensive lessons that are distilled down into practical terms. And I think that's one thing that that is a hallmark for what you've done.
Well, I appreciate that. And I've stubbed my toe. And earlier in my career, and Rhiana might actually acknowledge this for me or as a proof point, I had a hard time saying that I made mistakes, but I was making them left and right. And watching that same failure mode in enough organizations stops at some point from being a curiosity and becomes an obligation to do something about it. So the podcast, the Substack, the coaching work, all of it's an attempt to name the pattern clearly enough so that the next person in the room can see it before it becomes the crisis that they, in fact, are managing themselves.
Well, and I think that's what makes the show different from most of the HR content out there. And I think that's why we get a different level of appreciation. It's pattern recognition from inside the work. It's not aspirational HR.
It's great. So, Scott, we've heard from Jackson on why he built Talent Sherpa. I would love to hear from you. What made you walk away from your CHRO seat? And how in the world did the two of you end up in a room together?
Okay, so that's two questions. I'll take them one at a time. I don't think I've walked away from a CHRO role per se, because I still feel really invested in that. But I walked away from actively being a CHRO because of timing and technology. I'm on my third on Propulsion AI is my third entrepreneurial venture, and it happened. I was an early adopter of AI back to like 2018 when we weren't commercially talking about AI being integrated into the workforce. I was working in Silicon Valley, and we were using artificial intelligence to market price jobs. And, I didn't have any comp team, and yet I needed to deliver really thoughtful analysis because we were competing for really top talent. We used artificial intelligence to do it. And I worked for an organization called Singularity that really focused on disruptive technologies. Those technologies started to progress to the point that I said, you know what? I have got to go try and do something with tech to really to serve the workforce, or I'm just going to miss the opportunity. And so I founded Propulsion AI. Jackson and I wound up in the same room because I cold called him about our platform. And, I was persistent.
If memory serves.
And he did turn me down. And in part, it was his company situation, less than my platform. At least that's the story he tells me that I'm going to choose to believe. So Jackson, don't tell me anything different than that. But that, my persistence in trying to sell became a friendship. And then we had a recognition that we saw workforce dynamics pretty similarly. And we started talking about it. And one of us said, I think, we should probably record these. And I think the other one said, who would be interested? And here we are with a top 100 podcast. So.
It's incredible.
Yeah. But we still want to bring that kind of raw, this is the way it should work, to everyone who's serious about this function so that we can do something significantly different. And that's really why we focus in on the constraint-based HR and the focus in on clarity and the use of work redesign around tools, because I think that's where the future of the function is going to go.
That's amazing. Thank you both for sharing. I appreciate it. So one more thing before we hop into these awesome questions from our listeners. I wanted to let you know that I've taken the liberty of rewriting some of your questions to help sharpen the discussion. So I want to apologize in advance to anyone who hears their name and says, hey, that's not exactly what I wrote. What is she doing? Possibly you were a little too polite. Some of these needed a little more edge. I like a little spice. So, are we ready to do this?
Let's do it.
Okay, this first question is a version that I'm also hearing from several of my clients that I'm working with right now. So, Ryan from Atlanta has written in and said, my firm just announced a major AI rollout. Leadership is obsessed with the technology side, the new tools, new vendors, new dashboards, but no one's really talking about whether our people know how to use any of it or what changes when they do. Is this just how every company's doing it right now? Or are we actually behind? Jackson, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think first off, are you behind really depends on the paradigm that you're looking at. And I think the companies that are on the right track and the companies that are getting results today don't start with, okay, what tool can I give people and how can I map adoption? They actually start one step backwards, and that's mapping the work. And from my experience working with different companies, that sequencing is the whole game. And so we've talked about this on the pod before, but start with a work map. Don't start with the vendor. You actually have to interview the vendor because I think Scott talks about this a lot. If they're not being curious about what problems you're trying to solve, they're just talking about the features and benefits and what they bring, like it's not going to work because the tool decision has to be downstream of understanding how the work itself needs to change.
And what I would also tell Ryan Jackson is that one really simple question is going to open up the understanding of what's going on in the company. And I would ask the CEO, why are you asking, or why are you adding the technology? Well, why is this ad important to you? The answer tells you everything and may tell you kind of the absence of a plan, in which case you now have an idea about how you can steer it into a positive result.
Yeah, because like this is the key point, and Scott, I think you've been really helpful for me to understand this more clearly. Up to this moment, all the technology adoptions have been, in fact, technology adoptions. They've been kind of bolted onto whatever foundation was there before. No one really looked underneath. No one ever really asked, should we be doing this work? No one really asked, where's the high value added work from the low value added work? No one asked, like, are there things where we have high value talent on low value activities? This moment allows us to redesign the work in a way that has the ability to automate the task that no one gets joy from doing anyway, figures out a way to get people in and above the loop where human judgment matters most. And then ultimately has a third part, which is an interim or a elastic talent model, which we're going to talk about here in a few weeks with Jamie Jacobs from Gig Talent. This is just such a different moment.
Well, thank you both. Along the AI talk track, there's been so many questions submitted. So Jennifer from Atlanta is one step further down the road. So Scott, I'll be interested to get your insights here. So let me walk you through Jennifer's question. She says, I keep hearing that AI makes individual contributors 30 to 40% more productive. My CEO is already doing the math on the headcount. So how do you have an honest conversation with the leadership team on what this actually means for our people without it turning into strictly a cost-cutting exercise dressed up as transformation?
Yeah. So there's so many things in that question. The first thing I would challenge the assumption a little bit, and the stat probably came from somebody smarter than me, but the 30 to 40% more productive, like just adding the technology is not going to make you more productive. If you have a system for mapping out what the outcome is, backing it up through the work, and then understanding the steps that you need to take to enable with technology, that's different. But if you're just adding tech, I don't think a 30 to 40% bump on anything is practical. The second piece, and I think it's really the heart of the question, is how do I have the conversation? And I think the right answer there is get ahead of it. Start looking at your own team and start looking at the things that are holding your team back. Jackson and I talk a lot about constraints. And normally when the subject comes up, we're talking about constraints for the business. And as a CHRO, if you can find the constraint and figure out what relaxes the constraint and then work backward into a program, that's the right move. Here, I would take the same logic and I'd apply it to your own team. What's holding your team back? How much of that is rules driven? How much of that could be enabled with technology? then do a scan for tech, but it's a scan for tech with a purpose. You're not looking for AI. You're not looking for any tech. What you're looking for is a way to enable, without the people, that portion of the work that's constraining your team. Once you've done that, you now have a way of saying, I'm going to take that headcount and I'm going to transfer it into something that we can't do. And if you're able to do that, that's the entree to the conversation with your CEO, because you've created a small scale model of what can operate at a larger scale. And in introducing it and introducing your own example, you're now showing your CEO that there's a real opportunity, not cost cutting, which is a short term gain, but productivity growth, which is a long term growth strategy.
MIT actually published something in, I think it was March, that said that roughly 5% of all implementations have not led to a positive ROI. And I think that the root cause of that is we haven't treated it as a work redesign. And part of the work redesign approach is you actually need to step back and say, if I'm going to free up this capacity, let me tell people what it is that I want them to be doing with that freed up capacity. And if you don't do that, then sure, you're gonna have the finance guys say, let's go take the heads out. But we're not seeing that productivity today because we haven't defined that. And that, I think, is why you see some of the results that you do.
Well, and I think you said it a second ago, and I want to double click on it for the audience. It's because nobody redesigned the work. The thing that's different about AI that's different from any other technology is that it forces us to fundamentally reconsider the distribution of work between people and machines. And in the absence of that redesigned work, we're going to apply it to the tasks that exist today. So I think your point from a moment ago is really well made. You've got to think about it as work redesign.
And Andreessen Horowitz wrote something here, I think it was about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And they said the companies that benefit from AI are not thinking about it as a cost out. They're instead focusing on how do we use this as a growth and innovation lever. And I think that's an outfit that has done some pretty good stuff with companies over the years. I think we should pay attention.
The next question comes in from Marcus from Washington, D.C. Marcus, I got to tell you, I felt this one hit me right in the heart. So here's the question. It feels like HR is getting handed the AI problem without the authority to actually solve it. We're supposed to own the strategy, but the decisions really are being made within IT and finance. Jackson, how do you get real ownership out of this when no one's really willing to give up that control?
I think you need to start upstream and defining what kind of technology this is supposed to be. If you lose that initial argument, you are going to lose all the subsequent arguments, and it will turn into a cost out technology implementation. And as a result of that, I think you may find some short term wins, but you're not going to turn that into a growth and innovation engine. But I'd also note that ownership isn't granted by kind of what function is in your title. It's from being a person in that room with the most useful answer to a question that matters, like, which I think is, how does this capability change what our people can do? What does that work look like on the other side? And there's no one else in the room that's going to be able to have that conversation. IT can't, finance can't, but we can. And I think it's really important to do the upfront homework so that you have that perspective and lean into discomfort, even at some personal risk, to make sure that that conversation is being had at a C-suite and board level. Otherwise, it just turns into a cost out. And I think that's going to hurt the company long term. But Scott, you live in this space. What do you think?
Well, I actually, what I wanted to contribute, Jackson, has nothing to do with technology, but has to do with a bunch of prior episodes that you and I have done together. Because if you look at the themes that run throughout this show, we're talking about altitude, we're talking about mandate, we're talking about voice in the debate. And those are not things that you just wake up one day and you decide, okay, I'm going to have a voice in the debate, and then you have it, right? You're working toward that. And I think, this Marcus's question is really why you're working toward it. Because when these sort of existential crisis moments come, you have got to have built the capital already that sustains it. And every head in the room has got to turn toward you. So if you're not thinking about mandate or about altitude or about voice in the debate and how you sit at that table with a perspective on the business, like plant the tree today, right? Best time to plant it 20 years ago, next best time right now. go back and find those old episodes, because that's where the heads are going to turn to you. And you're going to have something to say that includes some cost out, but also some productivity growth and some new enablement that leads to higher engagement.
And just be real practical on it. Like, find something you can insert yourself in now, insert that work design lens, and then keep doing that. Whether you're invited or not doesn't matter. That's the voice in the debate that needs to be heard. And if you do it sufficiently with unique value-added perspectives, I think that dynamic ultimately starts shifting. So authority is going to follow the demonstrated impact on the business, not an org chart fight. You can't win an org chart fight because no one really cares about that. It's about usefulness.
Yep, completely agreed. Elena from Chicago is 8 months into her AI rollout, and her dashboards are looking great. Congratulations, Elena. That's awesome. Scott, Elena's concerned. Nothing in the business has actually moved. What did we miss? Did they miss anything? I don't know what they're measuring.
Well, I think you just put your finger on it, at least for my answer. And, Jackson, maybe we should do a show where we have a bunch of people that listen, like in a room together, where we can have a back and forth, because it's really not clear what, we can assume what they miss. Here, I think, would be a likely candidate. What were you trying to do? What was the business constraint? What were what change did you need to see that you brought in this technology and you started measuring these things, right? There's an old paradigm, that I think that largely we work with people. We hire them, we assign them tasks, we give them tools, and I just, that doesn't translate to AI. AI is really about the redistribution. I mean, I think the opportunity for the workforce with AI is the redistribution of work. So what was it that you were trying to move in the business? How did you expect to see that? Where did you apply the technology to do it? Those are all predecessor questions. So I hate to not have a direct and practical answer to it, but I think that's probably the best. That would be where I would point you if you missed something, Elena.
Yeah. And maybe here's the question I would ask to kind of put a fine point on what you said, Scott, which I agree with completely. Like, just ask the question, what in the business is different because of the rollout? Like, spend a little bit more time just focusing in on that question. And if you can't answer it, then that's why the business isn't moving. If we have a dashboard, well, okay, timeout, do over, but you gotta define the clarity of outcomes up front, which is something we've talked about a little bit here. When it comes to individual roles, it's equally true when it comes to this kind of organizational chaos inducing technology. What are you solving for?
Jackson, so let me double click on that, because there were two parts to what you said. And one of them, just asking what's different as a result of the rollout, is trailing metric. And there may be value in that. But I think you're asking a better question, which is, what did we want to be different? And are we actually seeing that? And did we apply the technology to that leading question, the leading indicator question, in the right way?
Yeah, I think that's right. Rhiana, what are you saying?
Yeah, I think it's all about, double clicking, figuring out what are we measuring? How do we do it with the business? Do we have cross-functional partnership from the leaders? It really starts with that prelim conversation that you guys have already identified for Elena. So moving on, we heard from Jennifer. Her question was more about her CEO doing math. Tyler wants to get ahead of the math, and we've talked about this a little bit, but I want to make sure that we answer Tyler's question. Tyler from San Diego. You keep hearing about AI taking work off of people's plates, but nobody's talking about what you do with those people once the work is gone. We've been talking about this. So how do you have that redeployment conversation with finance before it becomes a headcount decision? So, who wants to take this one? Just kind of,
Yeah,
ahead.
I do. I think when you do the work redesign engagement, and I think it follows a set of very, very clear methods. You define what the process is supposed to deliver. You then take a look at the tasks associated with that process, and you identify, is this a high value added task or a low value added task? We then redesign human work around the high value added task, and we use AI to try to automate as much of the low value added tasks. But then you have to figure out on the backside of it, what is the opportunity cost from what your previous life has been doing that you can then apply these newfound, you know, capacity hours towards. And it's really funny early on in this whole kind of evolution, you heard, "Oh, this is going to be the end of coders as we know." But like, I've been in technology for the last several years. We have had a 10% capacity of people who actually know how to do that work. And so the backlog of coding that needed to get done, all that did is it kind of pulled it forward. That same model, I think, holds true in almost any work redesign effort. So, for example, if you can figure out in the human capital space how to take your HR business partner and get them out of the compliance, did you do the performance review, and turn them into what was the quality level of that performance review, that actually has a value add that we've never been able to get to. And you know, that's the lens when you do the ROI, you need to be pulling it in. And then you need to just make sure that that math is included before the savings math starts.
And Jackson, I would add one thing, trying to continue that example. It's not just the transference of the business partner activity that matters, but if performance evaluation, if performance management, if performance coaching, or whatever you want to call it, if that gets more effective, what's the net business impact that's going to happen? Where's the margin improvement? Where's the productivity gain, right? That's what the HR leader should be looking for. Because then when you're speaking to that CFO, you're saying, look, we need to improve performance management because this is the impact it's going to have on the business. To do that, I have to get my people out of these transactional activities. I'm going to use technology to do that. Here's where I'm going to put their effort. That's language that the CFO can understand. And it's also about the application of technology. And it's also about the redesign of the work. And Tyler, you shouldn't miss in Jackson's answer that key piece, which is you have to redesign the human's work.
And I am so embarrassed that you actually caught me failing to add the "so that" after all the times that I talked
I
about
learned
having
it from you.
so that. But thank you for the addition. You were 100% right.
So Stephanie from Houston is
Yay,
in a unique,
Houston.
yay, Houston. She's in a unique situation. Her CEO wants her to lead the company's AI transformation. Her concern is that her HR function is 3 years behind. Do I fix my own house first before I lead the broader initiative? Well, my experience, there's not a clean sequence. But Jackson, I'm curious to hear what you think.
My gut feel is you can't credibly advise others through a transformation that you are visibly exempt from. You know, that credibility gap will be real, and I think people will see it. So I don't think it is fix HR first and then go do something else. I don't think it is do something else without fixing HR. You got to demonstrate some form of transformation in your own house. So pick something that changes fast and is pretty visible, and then give it a name, and then talk about it at the enterprise level at the same way you're doing it as part of the broader initiative. So it's not two separate tracks. Then I think you need to also be really focusing on how to become transparent about where you are. And that's a leadership behavior, and being very, very clear on here's where we're headed. Here's what we've learned. Here's what we've gotten right. Here's those areas where we stubbed our toe. I think that becomes really important too, especially in your own house as you're talking broadly to the enterprise. I think it signals honesty.
Rhiana, can I throw something in here as well? I want to try and build on Jackson's answer. And Jackson, I want to go with something you taught me, and a place where you've helped me kind of get past myself. The transformation's never done, Stephanie. You're always going to find something, right? And so you can't afford to wait around until the transformation's done. And I think that's the point that Jackson is wanting to make. But where I would take this answer kind of a different direction is you need to set up for a hard conversation. And I don't mean hard because it's a difficult conversation, but you need to go to your boss and understand the altitude. He wants you to lead the company's AI transformation. Why? What's the business impact? What is in his, I'm assuming it's a head, he, I thought I heard that in the question, could be a she. What is in their head, right? Why does that CEO want AI in this organization? What are they seeing? If you're not clear on that, no matter who is in the leadership seat for an initiative, you're going to step off in the wrong direction.
Completely agree. So Ingrid from Bergen We're on the AI track. We're talking about roles and teams. So her team continues to ask her what AI means for their roles. She has a team of recruiting coordinators, HR business partners, analysts, and Ingrid is being vulnerable and really transparent. She's told her team, I don't have the honest answer, which is great. I don't know that any of us do, Ingrid. I love this question. So, Jackson, Scott, what does our HR function look like in 3 years? And how do we prepare the people for it when we ourselves don't yet know what it's going to look like?
Jackson, can I lead on this one?
Yeah, do it.
So Ingrid, I wrote an article. You can find it in the perspectives page of our website. The article is titled, While You Make Incremental Improvements, Your Competitors Are Rebuilding Everything. If you read that article, you're going to see my practical prescription for the future of HR. And I think, it's great. I love the fact that you said to your team, I don't have an honest answer. If I were there whispering in your ear in that moment that you said it, I would have said, and make sure you tell them that you're going to find it together. Because I think the key to unlocking is really understanding from their perspective, where is the work that can be transformed? Then you can find an answer to what AI means or doesn't mean, because AI is not the right application for every single problem in the world right now. There are other technologies that still are valid, but your people on the front line are going to understand, because they do it every day, the stuff that's holding them back. So similarly to the way that Jackson and I are trying to push heads of HR to look for business constraints, you need to be looking for the people constraints. Where are your people spending an inordinate amount of time that is not contributing an inordinate amount of value? Once you understand that, and once you understand where they think they could contribute more value, you have a way to redesign their role. And the pieces that are designed out of their future roles are the ones you're looking at as candidates for technological innovation. So I think it's great, the honesty. I think I would go back to him and I would say, let's do an exercise together. Let's start to work this out. And, and along the way, I would say, read my article, because what I'm arguing is take all the transactional stuff out and then focus on what you should be focused on, which is workforce development.
I'll add, you should read my articles too, but the one that Scott's
You have more
referencing,
than that.
yeah, well, I had more free time.
They can't read that much.
It is a really, really good one. The headline from what I heard Scott say, just kind of summarized, is you need to be honest with a plan. And I think that's a really important piece. But I also want to kind of go in a little different direction here, because this one is so unknown. It's harder for us to ingest, internalize, and then bring forward in a confident way. I totally get that. But there are examples in my own personal life that I think is really useful here. If you've ever seen an emergency room doctor, that is the metaphor for what I think we're about to be going through if we haven't started yet. There is a ton of technical training that these people go through. There are protocols that they use and they build around to do the right thing in the moment that matters. And yet every moment that matters has something that isn't perfect. And so you have to improvise. You have to apply those skills in a hardened way, but in a very, unclear and in the fog of war, to mix two analogies. But we have to be comfortable dealing in the ambiguity from a position of strength. That's different from, I'm used to having firm answers and I will not rest until I have firm answers in the future. The whole world's going to pass us by if we take that approach. Don't do it. Be comfortable leaning into that discomfort. And back to Scott's earlier point, honesty with a plan, we'll figure it out together. That's as good as we're going to get.
Yeah, that's spot on. Thank you both. Michelle from Philadelphia says, strategic workforce planning used to be a top 3 priority for CHROs, but now it's dropped to 5th. Meanwhile, AI is eliminating roles faster than anybody can rebuild them. Is the field just getting fatigued with planning exercises that never go anywhere? Or are we actually taking our eye off of something critical right now? Jackson, I'd be curious to get your thoughts here.
Well, first off, I think it's unclear that AI is eliminating roles faster than anyone's rebuilding them. I push back on that one. I think there's a lot of talk about people making changes as a result of AI. But that doesn't square with the 5% of the AI deployments have a positive ROI. So look, there are times, and I've been inside of companies, and I wish this wasn't true, but it's totally true. If you were going to do something anyway, and there's a nice way to kind of tuck it underneath a broader umbrella, you're going to tuck it into the broader umbrella. And oh, by the way, this one, especially in the public facing markets, and probably in the private ones as well, give you enough cover. And the people that own your shares are pretty comfortable because it feels like you're moving forward. So I would not necessarily believe that the AI is eliminating roles. I think it is absolutely true that you are going to be in a world where you have two distinct roads. One road is going to be somebody that fights it, that says, I'm not going to engage in it, that's pushing back on the changes. And then there's a different road that says, I'm going to use this as a vehicle to learn everything I possibly can about what I do and what I want to do and what brings me joy. And I have a 140 IQ tutor that's sitting in my pocket at all times. And I have the ability to use this to improve my personal productivity, but I have it also as a thought partner with me to help shape things. Like, those are the two paths. Those two outcomes are going to be remarkably different. And that's not going to happen in the future. That's like happening now. Yeah, Scott.
Well, let me toss in a couple of stats and they support what you're saying. Challenger, Gray, and Christmas says that less than 5% of 2025 layoffs were genuinely AI driven. And, that is not what you hear in popular press. It's not what you read online, but, that's their work looking back at 2025. Forrester in a 2026 report said 55% of companies regret their AI layoffs. And we're starting to hear this term more, boomerang hires. So I think the point you're making about CEOs have a constituency. It's their board, right? And they have to say, hey, we're moving, we're cutting edge, we're doing this. And what's the evidence of that? Well, we're laying these people off. Well, you know what? You're also rehiring them for a variety of reasons and in a variety of locations.
Yeah. There are companies that were planning to do a remarkably deep cut. And this has been in the works for 12 months. And in the last month, they decided to put it all under the umbrella of AI enablement. It has nothing to do with it. They were offshoring jobs. That's what they were doing. So inside your own business, what matters is, what are you telling your employees and your stakeholders? And that's where I think you need to be courageous and be really focused on the clarity that matters. Because if you don't do that, you want to have enough credibility for the next time you go through this, because there will be a next time you go through this. Don't use all of your voodoo in your first run.
We do want to move us into questions more around programs and the CHRO seat itself. So our question comes in from Catherine from Minneapolis. My firm just did a big investment in leadership development. Awesome. They brought in a major firm. They did 360s, ran cohorts, the whole shebang. 2 years later, has anything really changed? How do you know if a leadership development program is working? And when do you pull the plug? Well, my head jumped to, what were you measuring? But Scott, what do you have for us?
Well, I think Jackson and I are probably both chomping at the bit to answer this question. It's a great question, Catherine. But let me do the simple answer first, and then I'll give you the deeper answer that comes from some of our other episodes. How do you know it's not working? Well, you're not sure anything changed, so it's not working. How you start a leadership development initiative, I think this is where I think a lot of HR people, where we trip ourselves up. And I will speak about myself because I'm confident that I've done it. I came out of learning and development. I have made some sublime programs that did absolutely nothing. Back to the constraint logic. I think you first got to get down to root cause. And if you listen to the previous episodes that Jackson and I have done, we think there are a couple of things that leaders need to be focused on. And until they are focused and demonstrating capability in those areas, the rest of the leadership agenda probably matters less. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but it probably matters less. Here are the two things. Do you know what you are expected to do every single day? Not the tasks, the outcomes you're expected to generate. If the answer to that question is no, there's your leadership development program. Your leader is not delivering that layer of clarity, and your people need it. And you know what? Gallup tells us 47% of the working population can't answer yes to that question, that they understand what's expected. Second thing is, do you have the support that you need in order to do it? If the answer to that question isn't yes, there's your leadership development program. So out of those two questions, I think until you can prove that your leaders are delivering at that level, the rest of the agenda, put it to the side. And you know what? It's easy to deliver, it's quick to make, and it's easy to measure.
Yeah. Two quick points on that. First, 10 points for Scott for using the word sublime in a management podcast on learning and development. That was amazing. Second,
Thank you.
yeah, well,
I'm
I'm
going to work
usually
in
the one.
penultimate and tripartite.
The second piece is listen to our podcast we did a couple months ago on leadership development. What we said in the episode was that a lot of leadership development comes out of the lack of clarity of what a manager is supposed to be doing. If your leadership development is focused in on a broad swath of expectations that may or may not have a that leads to a business result, like stop doing that. Focus on the clarity that Scott talked about, and then figure out where you have talent density and where you have incumbents in those roles where you have to make radical improvements, and take those same resources and dedicate it to making the people in the roles that matter most the best that they can be in the role. That's how you'll be able to turn it into outcomes really quickly.
Rhiana, can I just have one 30-second
Yes.
addition? Because to try and marry these two tracks of questions, like we can give our people AI tools. If they don't know how to use them, and if their boss doesn't know how to think about those tools in the context of their work, it's not going to generate anything. No productivity, no headcount, none of it, right? So your leadership development, again, coming back to clarity, like, are you clear about how to use the new tech tools that we're trying to give you? No, I'm not. Well, there's a part of your leadership development. How are the managers thinking about tech?
Yeah, that's spot on. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Sandra from Chicago has a question for you, Jackson. And she's quoting you. Jackson, you've said that CHR influence problem is partly structural and partly self-inflicted. I'm a CHRO at a mid-market company. My CEO likes me, but I don't think he sees me the same way he sees the CFO. So what is one thing? I don't want you to pontificate and tell me a bunch of things. Just one thing, Jackson, that I can do to change that dynamic.
I can't believe you would accuse me of this, but I'll try. One thing, walk into the next conversation carrying a point of view on a business problem through a talent lens, not an HR problem. If you do that consistently, the way you think about those conversations will change. And if you want help on doing that, I do have something called the Mandate Protocol, which is available on my website for $297 that can get you right where you need to be around the mandate with either your CEO or your business leader in 5 days, and it'll help you move that path.
Why do you think that the CFO and the CEO have a different relationship? I know I said one question. You answered her question brilliantly, but I don't, I want people to understand that relationship, CHRO to CFO.
Not to be overly generous to my colleagues in the finance world, but their view changes how the CEO thinks about decisions. And when you have a CHRO who is at enterprise altitude, they have an organizational visibility that no one else has. They can help you figure out where execution is failing, where a leadership gap is costing, where a structural decision isn't producing. And if you look at the business strategy through a talent lens, you predict what's going to happen, why it's going to happen, and then prescribe actions. Like that's how you get involved in the same question. It works not just because you're showing business acumen, although that's critically important, but because you're actually answering a question the CEO is already sitting with. Most of the time, HR people show up with HR problems and solutions and programs, and that's adding to the CEO's worry list, not helping to resolve one that's already there.
Thank you. Patricia from Phoenix is on a search committee looking for a CHRO. Half of the finalists have deep HR backgrounds, half have business backgrounds with some HR experience. Every time they debated internally, they just go in circles. We know what that's like. So how do you actually make that call? And, what do you do if you regret it, if you get it wrong?
Patricia, here's the first thing I would say is congratulations to your talent acquisition team for not screening out based on a really limited profile for CHRO. I think that's great. I'll also tell you, like I said a second ago, I came out of learning and development. My first official HR job was as a head of HR. And I had very little HR experience. Now, in that assignment, I was really, really lucky. And this is a part of what I want to give you in the answer is that I had people that reported to me who were absolute experts at what they did. And if there's one thing I think I do really, really well is I bring people together, I get their opinions out, I listen very intently, and I find ways to connect different points of view into a comprehensive answer. And I did that with this group. And you know what? Along the way, they taught me the HR stuff that I was missing. And what I brought was a business lens that they didn't have. And so it worked. And so, I personally think, Jackson, I think you and I think about this similarly, but correct me where I'm mischaracterizing you. The head of HR is just a completely different job. I would go as far to say it's not even an HR job anymore. And if you can't, like if you come up through HR, you have a big boundary or obstacle that I didn't have. I didn't have to lose all of the HR training because I never had it. I, had the business training and that carried me and I learned along the way the HR things that I needed to learn. But if you are coming out of that HR thing, out of HR sort of the ladder, you've got to really work to divorce yourself from that because it's just a different job. So I would look at the situation, Patricia. I would look at who you have on the ground. I would look at the skill sets that are in the organization. And I would say, do those skills serve the things that we need, the compliance, regulatory aspects of HR to serve? And then I would put a business person. If that is true, I'd put a business person at the head. If the situation's different, you may need something different, and maybe the HR skill sets become more important. But that's how, and I can't obviously advise you because I don't know enough details, but that's how I would go about making the choice.
Yeah, let me maybe push back on this, and this might come across as odd because I've been so vocal on the need for business acumen in the CHRO spot. By the way, we agree completely. It's not an HR job; it's a business job. That said, there are things that growing up in the function provide you with the opportunity to do and see that it's hard to capture if you didn't grow up in that environment. So I don't think it's a matter of business background or HR background. You need both. But what you need is someone who can look at business strategy through a talent lens, predict what's going to happen, identify why it's going to happen, and then figure out in the moment that matters, what do you do about it to either make sure it keeps happening or keep it from happening if you're trying to avoid it. And so my selection would be actually to put a business problem in front of your finalists and see how they attack it. Whether you have an HR background or a business background, you both have the opportunity to win in that battle. And that's the cage match that I would set up to see who wins.
I love that. I think that's absolutely smart.
Great idea. Carlos from Madrid writes in and says, I've had HR needs to be more strategic conversation QRI role at 4 different companies over 18 years. Same words, same outcome every single time. Is strategic HR a real destination or just a story the function keeps telling itself? And Carlos, I hear you. I've been here before. So Jackson, give us the candid, honest answer.
Yeah, well, first off, hello, Carlos. Really appreciate you listening. Thanks for looking at being an early editor of my book that I'm writing. So he's a longtime listener and really appreciate him. Let me try to be blunt on this.
Please, Jackson, I want you to be blunt. I'm asking you.
This one
hit us.
This one hurts, right? Because 25 years plus of HR needs to be more strategic with almost no movement, maybe some limited movement in actual influence. That's a data point. It's not a perception problem. There is, as I mentioned, from my family has a long line of alcoholics. The first step is to admit that you have a problem. Strategic, by the way, has become a self-description and a posture. But how the hell do you measure it? I don't know. It drives me nuts. So I try not to use the word strategic at all, because if you have 5 CEOs and 5 CHROs and you say define strategic, you're going to get 25 different answers. So I think the CHROs with real influence stop asking to be seen as strategic. They just started doing the work. Same thing to do with a seat at the table. Like, that's a passive activity. It's a participation trophy in corporate form. Like, don't worry about getting a seat at the table. Show up with a voice in the debate, with a perspective that changes what the CEO does next. If you do that, you don't have to worry about these stupid labels.
You know what I would add to
Completely.
that? You know what I would add to that, Jackson? Pick your metrics. Here's what I would do. If I want to be seen as strategic, I'm picking units of output and I'm picking revenue per employee. And I'm looking at what can I do with the workforce that is going to move those numbers? Because that's exactly what the CFO does. The CFO is thinking about deployment of capital and what are the measures that are going to show that the capital is being deployed in the best possible way. And we need to be thinking about the workforce in the same terms. We're just using the wrong measures. Engagement is a means to an end. Satisfaction is a means to an end. Time to hire is a means to an end. Those aren't business metrics. They're the ones that we've been focused on that keep us feeling as if we are not contributing something to strategy. When we start talking about, look, if we're going to move revenue per employee, we're going to have to move these 3 rocks. That's the essence of strategy. It's a lever that moves a big rock that's meaningful somewhere. So
And I would double down on that and say, I think one of the underserved focus areas for HR people are decision rights and definitions around them, because the drag in how things get done and decided will automatically have a positive effect if you do the work well on the measures that you talk to. I would throw talent density on there as well. It's the only one that I've been able to find that actually has a forward looking view of future performance, and I think that's important too. But yeah, all of our measures are in the rearview mirror. Stop using them. They're dumb.
Completely agree. I want to congratulate Kenzie from Chicago, who's spent the last 3 years learning the business from finance, operations, and our favorite word, strategy here. My CEO still brings me in after decisions are made, not before. What is different about CHROs who get there, are part of that decision-making process? Scott, what insights do you have for us?
what's different about the CHROs who are ahead of that and get brought in early?
Yep, before the
Is that
decisions
the
are
heart of the
being made.
question?
That's what I believe the heart of the question is. And Kenji, apologies if I've gotten it wrong, but I do believe that's the heart of the question.
So Kenji, I think it's like where I would be looking is what's the conversation that you're having? Here's a term that I learned from Jackson, and now like I seem to find myself using it like all of the time. Go back and audit your last 5 meetings with your boss and look at what was on the agenda and not what you came in with, but what you actually talked about. And if the nature of what you were talking about in those last 5 meetings is all transactional or all HR programs or all, whatever, that like that's a clue to you, that's signal. But if what you're talking about in those meetings, and I suppose it might not be for you because you're asking the question, but if what you're talking about those meetings is what we were just answering in that last question, here's revenue per employee today, here's where we want it to be, this is how I'm going to get it there. Here's where our output is today. Here's where I see differences across these facilities. Here's what I think is accountable for those differences. Here's what I'm going to change, right? That's a completely different conversation with your boss. And the CHROs who are getting brought in ahead of time are the ones who have invested the time to have that kind of conversation. Here's the business constraint. This is how I think we can relax it. This is what I'm going to do with the people in order to do it. And it's just that simple of a formula.
Yeah. With the folks that I coach who are sitting CHROs, this is something we talk about a lot. So it's not just you, Kenji. Don't worry about that. This is a broad-based concern. Here's how I approach it. I love the audit, the five meeting agendas. I think that's important. I think you need to look at your calendar and figure out what are you doing to execute and what are you doing to change the work. And I think you need to find a way to spend a lot more of your time over, I don't know, we've talked about it in other pods, but right now the answer is we spend very little time changing the work. You also spend very little time thinking about how the work needs to change. So I would find time in your calendar to go do that. And then the play is you go into the senior team meetings and with the CEO or with your business lead if you're not sitting in the top chair yet, and you bring something that they needed and couldn't get anyplace else. Do that once, people will look at you funny. Do it a second time, they will start to notice. You do it consistently 3 times, 3 data points makes a trend, and they will start inviting you to the meetings because you're adding incremental value. That's how you do it.
Fantastic. Thank you. We're down to our last 2 questions, and they are connected, both about accountability, but from opposite ends of the same problem. So, Michael from New York says that accountability reset was necessary. Now, my best people have gone quiet. When does that become something that I can fix? Jackson, curious to get your thoughts here on accountability.
I don't like accountability because it looks backwards and it tends to be blame oriented. I like reliability and focusing on reliability because it asks the question, what has to be true for us to do what we need to go do? So I think the first step in that is like change your frame of reference, because I think the orientation, even using accountability, pulls you into a place that quiets people down if that's what you're worried about. The second is your best performers are auditing your culture every day. And when they go quiet, it's not necessarily disengagement. They're concerned about the psychological safety, and as a result of their self-censoring judgment while maintaining effort. And so performance kind of looks fine, but the organizational thinking atrophies because they're no longer sharing it. So how do you fix that? You need to create an environment where people have a belief that they can put an uncomfortable truth on the table, argue it vehemently, maybe even be wrong, and still belong to the team. And there are lots of different ways to get to that point, but that environment allows your top performers who are auditing to feel psychologically safe, to be uncomfortable, to share the hard truth that the organization needs to hear. So that's how I'd throw it.
Scott, anything else to add on that?
I'm not sure I do on that one. I mean, it's an interesting question, Michael. You know what I would love it if you would do is write more to us. Give us more than what you gave us in that question. Tell us a little bit more about the context, and maybe we can work it into another episode and help you a little bit differently.
Fantastic. Thank you. Christopher from Frankfurt writes in, I've watched organizations swing from nobody gets held accountable for anything to the only thing that matters is hitting the number. Both feel broken. I agree. Is there a version of high performance that doesn't eventually produce one of these 2 outcomes? Scott, what are your thoughts?
Well, so I first of all, I think it's false choice that like those are not diametrically opposite things. I'll also tell you how I've coached managers on one-on-one meetings. And I think this matters here because the interaction that you have in your one-on-one is going to determine what your people actually do, right? So I think a really solid one-on-one starts with a review of your numbers. But to start there, it means that you as the boss had to articulate those numbers. So clarity is job one. For every single manager in every single industry, in every single context, if you are not delivering clarity about the outcomes your people need to produce, about how you're going to measure their success, and about the targets that you need them to hit, if you aren't speaking repeatedly about that, then you're not doing your first job, and the rest of it is going to matter less. In fact, Jack Welch in his book Straight from the Gut, he talked about taking over at GE, and he said all I talked about for 24 months was 2 things. It was number 1 and number 2 in every industry and Six Sigma. He said I was so tired at the end of 24 months of talking about those things, I didn't think I could do another investor meeting. I didn't think I could do another company meeting. I couldn't talk about it any more than I had. And they were just starting to get it. And that's Jack Welch, right? So that's a big job delivering that clarity. But if you've delivered it, then now your one-on-one can start with, how are you doing to the numbers? Because you defined them, because you measured the pre-state, and because you can now observe the movement. How are you showing up vis-a-vis competencies that we said were important? And I think it's important for every manager to be picking those competencies with their people that they want their people to focus on, not 7, 1, maybe 2. How are you doing on the skills we said you were going to work toward building? How are you feeling about that? Where can I get some obstacles out of your path? tell me anything else that we need to talk about. I think that 5-point formula is the right way to hold a one-on-one. It's not the perfect way. There are a bunch, right? But that has worked, and it's worked for the people that I've coached. And when you do that, you start inculcating this idea that the numbers absolutely matter, because we're not paying you for activity. We're paying you for result. But how you get there matters too. And if you model that behavior, that becomes a multiplier.
The only thing I would add on to that, Scott, is focusing on the why the numbers matter. And
Good ad.
it's got to have some purpose driven element to it, especially with folks that are earlier in their careers these days. That is increasingly important.
Well, and Jackson, if you can't do the why that you're suggesting, you might have the wrong numbers.
Also true, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to say something like, we are accountable to these results because these results make these other things happen. And that I feel confident that the purpose of our business matters. And it's interesting, Mark Efron just did something at the Talent Strategy Group that had 50% of HR people don't think their business is a force for good in the world. I think I may have gotten that slightly off, but it was in that direction. And like, that is screaming a problem that we're putting in accountability without explaining why it matters. And maybe there's some companies where it doesn't matter, but I've never actually sat in one where I can't say we're doing this because of that. When I was in solar energy, it was pretty easy. When I was trying to help people find their forever homes, it was pretty easy. When we were bringing people ice cream and pizza, like that was really easy. And when I made toilet paper, it was still easy. It was a crappier job, but still.
Wow, I knew you were going to do that.
As an oldie,
But it doesn't always have to be some greater social good, right? Everybody wants to be part of an enterprise that's succeeding, and mapping back this is what your work enables us to do. It's the number 2 driver of employee loyalty, right behind a relationship of trust with your boss.
Amen. And the CHRO, hey, you guys are the right people to name that distinction. If you're a CEO or an operating partner, listen, like really focus in on that, because that is how you drive the culture. It is decision residue.
Wonderful. Thank you both. This feels like the right place to stop. We've covered AI, the function, your CHRO seat, and what it takes to hold the line on accountability.
Yeah, look, if there's one thread through all of this, it's that the frameworks have never really been the problem. Like the follow through is.
And I want those listening and those who sent in questions just to know that you got the real answers. So thank you both.
And it wasn't as scary as I was originally thinking. It's exactly how the show is supposed to go. And so I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. Where can people follow your work?
Well, it's my pleasure to join you and Scott. So thank you again. You can follow me at pinnaclepeakhr.com.
Yeah. And let me just put my full-throated endorsement behind Rhiana in the work. I've known her for 20 years, which for her meant that I think she might have been 5. But this is a person that has the ability to work with senior leaders across multiple functions and industries. She's been in the seat. She gets the joke. And if you need help, please reach out. And I want you to know why I trust her with this work, because I literally have seen her do it. So please go find her, and also let her know that you heard her on our podcast.
And you know what, Rhiana, it's been a real pleasure getting to know you. And I can't echo Jackson's point of view from having worked with you, but you've been really sharp in our prep sessions, and I'm happy that you're here. I would love it if you would come back, because I like this format. I think we should do more of this. We'll see what the audience reaction is.
We'll see.
Well, I hope the audience agrees. I'd love to come back.
It's all up to you, audience. You gotta make sure you take that step and write a comment and a review and make sure that we hear from you. But regardless, it's time to wrap up. And I just want to say thank you so much for tuning into the Talent Triple podcast, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. And we do this because it is so much fun to do with y'all. And episodes like today just demonstrate that with enthusiasm.
And we're trying to experiment in the episode. And so I say it every week, but I think I mean it even more today. If you liked this episode, do us a favor and hit the like button, because that gives us a signal that we can lean into. Better yet, subscribe, because that activates the algorithm and it helps spread the pod to other senior leaders who may benefit from the content. You can leave us a review on your favorite platform, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube. We are on all of those. It's free to you, it benefits us immensely, and it might help other senior leaders.
And I want to take just a second to talk about Scott's company. Propulsion AI is workforce intelligence for private equity. Their AI teammates serve as workforce risk before close, and they help leadership teams drive execution after. They're translating of strategy into individual accountability. They are coaching managers to define roles by outcomes, something most companies really need to focus on more than we do. And they give every employee a clear line of sight into what actually matters, which, as we've talked about today and before, I think is the foundation for an engaged workforce. It's all really, really good stuff. And it's all done through artificial intelligence because he's been doing this since machine learning. You can learn more at the very cleverly named getpropulsion.ai.
And Jackson, what we're finding is we originally were very focused on the diligence phase of private equity, but every private equity transaction that closes spawns a company that needs to execute. And increasingly, we're hearing from CEOs who need the same power that we're putting into diligence in the early stages of their execution for their companies. So if you have an interest, head on over to the website. And if you are a new CHRO, or if you're aspiring to be a CHRO, or if you've got the job and you're preparing to step into it, all three of those use cases, Jackson has built all of the tools that you need to help you operate exactly where we keep trying to drive you, at the altitude that the role demands. Personal coaching, the CHRO Ascent Academy, even his best-selling Substack. You can find everything at mytalentsherpa.com.
Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you, Rhiana, and thanks to everyone who's listening. Until next time, keep raising the bar, name the gap before it becomes the crisis, and keep on climbing.